Georgia at Missouri. We got a free pick from Vegas Runner. Who do you like and why?
I like Georgia in this game, the road favorite, and it's simple. We're seeing this happen already the first week of the college football season. It's carrying over into the second week, and that's an overreaction due to suspensions, due to injuries. We know historically the betting market overreacts, and here's a case of them doing it once again. Georgia has 4 suspended starters, but it's not going to be a problem because of how deep they are.
What do you how are you handling the handicap, Brian, on the suspensions?
Well, these suspensions, we knew a little bit ahead of time what was going to happen with that.
So you're saying it was somewhat baked into the line?
It basically was baked into the line. I mean, you're not looking at key numbers here anyway, so that's something you have to take a look at. But what I found very interesting about this one is when I heard some quotes from Nebraska. Nebraska goes to the Big Ten last year, and some of the players were talking about it after the season ended. They said, you know, it was a lot tougher getting used to preparing for a bunch of teams you hadn't seen before. They had to play 8 teams in the Big Ten last year they hadn't prepared before.
And was it the players talking about that or the coaches?
The players were talking about that. And they basically said that it was so much tougher because we're not used to playing these teams. And when you take a look at it, you know, the teams they're playing, Georgia, for instance, Georgia only has to prepare for 1 or 2 new teams. So I think that's an advantage.
So, so let's talk about that in a macro sense. So you're saying with all of these conference switches, you're saying you're giving a slight negative to the team in the new conference.
That's correct.
Who has to prepare for all the whole conference. I mean, that makes perfect sense, as opposed to Georgia, who's seen the SEC schedule
Now, would you say
already.
that's somewhat muted in week 1 or week 2 because they've had so much prep time?
Quite possibly, but you know, when you take a look at these 2 conferences, the Big 12 is always a big offensive, spread them out conference. The SEC is not like that. SEC is more of a pro-style conference, and they play better defense. So it's going to be a little bit tougher for these 2 new teams entering the SEC.
Point number 2.
You're looking at one of the top teams in the SEC. We all talk Alabama, we all talk LSU, but this year I think Georgia, Arkansas, and Florida are just as good as any of those top 2.
Well, hold on a second. So you're saying Georgia, Alabama, neutral field pick'em game.
No,
you're considering Georgia.
No, not at a pick'em.
So they're not as good.
Not at a pick'em.
So
No,
they're
not as good, but they're competing.
All right.
They're right there at the top.
Because I was going to make a bet with you.
No.
They're a top 10 team. I mean, you take a look at the SEC, half of the league is a top 10 team.
Fair enough, but is it equal or no?
No,
What is
as it
Georgia?
stands
What
right
is
now,
Georgia,
no.
Alabama on a neutral? What do you make that line?
Probably about 6.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah, that high?
I would think so.
I take the points. I take the points. This team, 15 returning starters, 9 on the defense. That was 5th in college football last year. You got a junior quarterback in Murray who has all his targets back from last year. I mean, you look at their offensive line. They lost 3 starters, but everyone they're about to plug in, they say are, you know, highly touted kids out of high school. So here's a team that I don't think is going to drop off from last year. If anything, I think they're going to improve.
So here's what I'm hearing. Point number 1 is overreaction to the suspensions. Point number 2, Georgia's just underrated in your mind.
And they're the superior team. You look at Missouri, I mean, they might have done good in the Big 12.
Well, they better be the superior team if they're laying on the road.
Yeah, but it's only, I mean, now it's down to 2. You know, I mean, obviously you got to factor in home field. But
absolutely, yeah.
Missouri coming from the Big 12, now playing in the SEC.
So we're saying Georgia's 5 on a neutral if you're giving 3 for home field.
Yeah.
Is what this line is implying.
Yeah, and they both had time to prepare because they both had cupcakes last week. But Missouri added some fuel to the fire. Their stud defensive lineman said he tried watching Georgia play Buffalo last week, and he had to turn his TV off because it was like watching old people play football. And you can believe Reich has him motivated.
Quickly, what's your main handicapping point on this game?
Well, my point in this that I hadn't mentioned is you take a look at Missouri's team last week. They played an FCS school that wasn't ranked, so they weren't tested at all. Now they have to play their second game against one of the better teams in the SEC. That's a major step up for them. I mean,
is that a good thing or a bad thing? Because it seems like oftentimes we'll talk about that prep game allows you to kind of work some stuff out, but also you're preparing a week ahead. You're saying, though, you make it a negative. They played such a cupcake.
I think it is, too. Especially, you got to add, too, that they're not practicing against a level of defense of Georgia's, unlike Georgia's offense, which they made it play at a cupcake last week, but all spring, they're going up against the Georgia defense.
So you're saying with a really good team, the actual act of practice has more yield?
For sure, especially for a team like Missouri that needs to run the football, and they've decimated their offensive line compared to last year. Right. Their number 1 running back went down. So here's a team that has to run to have success. They're not going to be able to do it against Georgia.
All right, well, we've talked this game out. Now comes the official pick.
SEC road favorite Georgia, minus the small spot at Missouri. Another case of the market overreacting to a suspension. Georgia's deep. They'll be fine in this game.
Let me ask you a question. Is that a rental, that jacket, or did you buy that?
This is a Bernini Beverly Hills.
you
can't rent
any of
them.
us know what that means?
You can't rent them.
We're both from Ohio and Pennsylvania. We don't even know what that means.
All right, guys, we're doing a ton of videos. Now we got the new studio. You can get them all at pregame.tv.